All right, welcome everyone to the Condor and the Eagle post-film panel discussion. Tonight, we have two climate activists for the film that you have just watched. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, and then if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. I also have a list of questions in case you guys are particularly shy. But yeah, Bryan, you wanna introduce yourself?
I am Bryan Parras. I live in Houston, Texas, and I am an organizer with Sierra Club, also a co-founder of an environmental justice organization called Tejas, and I'm also a media maker and happy to be here with y'all today. And especially happy to have a conversation with Casey and hear y'all's questions um, on this really kind of scary day, anticipatory day with the elections, of course. Casey.
Well, I told you in Panka. My name is Judy Abadi, Panka Abadi, Manchete Panka, Oklahoma, Southern Panka from Oklahoma. Good to see my little relative, Bryan, and good to meet with you as well, all of you who are on this call. I'm glad that you got to see that little film. We've really enjoyed seeing it every time we see it as well. I live in north central Oklahoma, where my people are dealing with an environmental genocide caused by the fossil fuel industry. In this particular case, Phillips 66, formerly ConocoPhillips, with pipelines and fracking and injection wells and the poisoning of the air, water, and our mother, the earth. We're grateful to still be alive after a forced removal from our homelands in Nebraska. And I'm coming to you as a survivor of a genocidal process that began in the 1700s and continues to today. I'm a mama, a sister and auntie, a grandma, a great-grandma, and a descendant of powerful people, and also a future ancestor to equally powerful people. Grateful to be with you tonight.
So the first question I have is, what does a just transition to a clean energy future look like?
I don't think it's that difficult, right? And if you can just imagine having all of the same things that we have, but not relying on fossil fuels to have them, that's essentially, the premise. But the deeper meanings, I think, are equally as important and a little less obvious. So the just transition is, looking at historical harms that have been inflicted on certain communities. Casey spoke about the forced removal, the theft of land, and the genocide of, entire peoples. Some who have been completely wiped off the planet. And with that came a sort of paradigm that relies on taking, indiscriminately, and that involves a complete lack of regard for the natural laws, and not just science. When we think about the conversations even right now about COVID-19 and the question of whether this disease is real or not, its impact on people, the amount of deaths and illnesses that it's caused. You know, science is not something that is debatable, and the natural laws are not something that is debatable. You know, our beliefs, our intentions, none of those matter when it comes to natural laws. But what does matter is our behavior and our actions. And the just transition, you know, takes into account those actions. And you know, we have not been good stewards of our home, you know, this land and this planet. And we have for too long allowed a minority of people to decide how this planet is run, and you know, have either been prevented from participating in making those decisions, or have neglected to take part in those decisions, or you know, have been unable to because of situational circumstances. So the just transition has to allow for everyone to participate in that process. And to do that, there will need to be, you know, some way of helping bring folks up to the same level of participation that, you know, so many of us have taken for granted. You know, so that's looking at not just folks in the U.S. but globally, right? The global South, who have been victims of extraction and colonialism and so on. So at home, you know, of course, there's wind and solar and other ways to get our energy, but I think also being mindful and responsible with how we interact with the rest of the world too is just as important. And you know, all of this can be very exciting. Like, you know, anyone who is born into this life and is growing up, you know, this is the kind of moment that like you kind of hope for, right? For your actions to actually mean something on a global scale, to do something that you know, could potentially change the course of history and, you know, the entire planet. Like that's a moment that we're in right now. And you know, depending on the decisions that we make in the coming years, will have far-reaching impact on the future, to generations after us. And so, you know, the just part I think is really important. You know, and it's sort of a framework that has been developed by many folks who think about equity, who have lived with injustice, and who have also, you know, paid attention to those natural laws, and been reading the signs, right, of devastation across the globe. So that's how I see it. There's definitely more like political wonky kind of ways of thinking about it, but you know, it's important for us to at least, you know, imagine what it means to you. Don't take my own word for it, but certainly I hope that I offered some kind of guide to help you imagine what it means for you. Yeah.
Just transition has many layers to it. I think in many ways the fossil fuel industry is very fearful of the thought. You saw the backlash when Joe Biden said we need to transition into renewable energies from the fossil fuels. And there was a lot of panic here in Oklahoma. Immediately, the political ads were saying, you know, there are 90,000 jobs dependent on fossil fuel. And that put fear into people's lives that they might not be able to take care of their families because this is the only way they know. So another way of looking at just transition is to consider making a way for those people who have worked in the fossil fuel industry, for all of their lifetimes, and maybe their generations before them in one form or another have worked within the extractive industry. And to help them understand that they deserve better and that they deserve to be retrained into how to live within a new framework of energy, that maybe they could be trained to be the people who build the windmills. Maybe they could be the people who have an understanding of how to make solar panels. And so that none of the families become disenfranchised and as hungry as the rest of us are, but actually have a way to have their own just transition that they deserve within the ways that they've been taught to exist. Because no one needs to blame the people who are trying their best to provide for those that they love. And there needs to be a way to go forward without that fear. One of the things that I really enjoyed watching and participating in was the Black Mesa Water Coalition's demands during the time that they were closing down a coal-fired generating plant there in the Dene area, Navajo area. And their ask was very reasonable to me. And that is when that coal-fired generating plant shut down and they went into bankruptcy and they were going into court settlements, that they asked for a bottom-up transition rather than the golden parachutes being provided for the people who are in the highest positions within the hierarchy of money making. They felt that the first monies, the first transition abilities should go to those the most impacted, those people on the ground who are being poisoned by that particular industry, the ones who are going to have the after effects. Once the other people are gone, they're going to still be living there in that devastated land. And then from there up, start moving upward into that pyramid of how this money should be distributed in a bankruptcy case. So it should first be the people literally on the ground, and then maybe the workers, and up and up and up and up until there's nothing left for those guys that want a golden parachute. They're just going to have to jump. You know, they've had it all these years. They know how to survive, and they're going to be all right. So just transition has as many ways to look at it as you can even imagine. What does it mean in your community? In my community, I would like it to look very similar to the way that the Black Mesa Water Coalition looked at it. That since the Ponca people, the tribe in our area, has been the most impacted, how do we see it? We see perhaps making our community of 800 to 2,000 be completely sustainable in terms of having, I would like to see solar energy in our areas. And when it comes to water that is being used by the frackers, how do we make sure that that is not wasted anymore? And how do we do that from within the infrastructure that we create that they pay for? They have become that top 1% by killing us and by killing the very living beings that create an interactive life on our Mother Earth, with our Mother Earth, our Father Sky. So let's begin with those beings. Who's going to provide that the deer have a safe diet? You know, who is going to provide for the fish that swims in the water? All of those things also have a right to life in a very real way of sustaining their generations to come, so that our generations as human species can also coexist in an honorable way. So just transition has to begin with the thought of how does all life move into living within the natural laws? How do we create a system that is a sacred system of life that is separate from and new again in the oldest way possible, the way that we always have existed? Just transition means that to me.
We have two very similar questions that came from the audience. The first is, how has the pandemic disrupted the social justice and environmental projects you're both involved in? What have been the largest adjustments you've had to make in order to get your message out? And then the other one was, would you mind speaking on how COVID-19 has affected your activism today? What sort of limits has this placed on your fight for environmental justice, and how have your goals adapted?
Bryan, I'll go ahead and begin here on how it is in my territory, if that's good with you. I think that, well, we are using one of the ways that things have changed because of COVID. You know, we're on a Zoom call here. I had never even begun to understand what technology is or means. And yeah, as you can tell, I'm still having a few problems. We had an ice storm here that has caused the equipment to kind of do what it wants to do. But I think that it has been a terrible, terrible, scary time and continues to be. But it also helps to humble human beings to understand that, you know, we don't have all the answers, and we don't have the wherewithal to fly around and continue to mess up other portions of the earth with our great wisdom and our huge egos, right? We've had to spend more time in our homes. We've had to, that's another form of just transition, if one wants to look at it that way. Because, you know, my young relative, Bryan here, the way that I got acquainted with his family was they were traveling through here, going to, were you with your dad at that time, Bryan?
Yeah.
On the way to Detroit to the social forum?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought so. And that was us enlarging our carbon footprint. You know, we were driving, we were flying, we were participating in person with all of these areas that we are now using our own voices over the internet. So COVID has caused us to be smart about how we connect and to be very intentional with whom and what messages are going out. There's not a lot of frivolity as there never really has been within these last, for me, 40 or 50 years of activism in this so-called environmental world, because we're really on that brink right now that Bryan spoke of. You know, many people are frightened. Me, I'm kind of excited because the breakthrough is finally here that we had been told about during all my young years of activism and spirituality, of this time of purification, when our Mother Earth, when our Father Sky, when the moon, the sun, and the waters begin to do their own form of activism and clean what needed to be clean. So even though our tribe, our people around us have been affected in a very sad, sad ways, we lost a 92-year-old wisdom keeper today, and we're hurt because of that. We also are learning that there are boundaries within this natural world that we have to respect, and that by doing so, we are doing less harm to the world around us in terms of being cleaner, being smarter in our approach. And we are being more targeted in the areas. We're also in a frightening time for us of many of our traditions having to be set aside, the funeral traditions, the songs, the dance, the things that we would ordinarily be participating in, we've had to move back away from. So our culture is being affected, and our families are again, and because of the fossil fuel industry, we have very fragile health. And I mean that in terms of diabetes, drug and alcohol abuse, and lung, cardiovascular diseases, cancers. So COVID is, once you get into these intergenerational living situations, just races through like wildfire. And we really have a difficult time. So it has been a matter of balance and rebalance every single day to understand what should be next. How do we do this? And I think that it's a fine test of humanity's will to stay part of this sacred system of life, is to understand how do we make the new world have the traditional and old value system that sustained us all through these millenniums of interactive life. And COVID is just another one of those that we will have to understand what is this resilience that we need to build. How do we go back to all of us planting our plants? How do we interact intergenerationally in a safe way? And how do we get over these Hallmark holidays that have really messed with us, thinking, oh, we got to trick or treat. Oh, we've got to go have a feast because there's a Thanksgiving that somebody invented when a pilgrim decided to kill a bunch of us, you know. I'm not a Christian, so the Christmas thing, we do it because we like to give away. We like to give to each other. But let's get over some of that commercial nonsense, you know. Let's try to pay attention to the real values. And so COVID has done that. And I'm still thinking all those things. Got some great plans for those non-holidays. Thank you again.
We have another question submitted in the Q&A. This may be a dumb question, but I am new to this topic. What is the correct way to dispose of all the black gunk and oil these industries have left in the rivers and lakes? What is the cleanup process?
That's an important question, and it's not a dumb question first, and I'm glad that this is a new topic for you, because that means that, you know, the work that many of us have been doing is having an impact. You kind of answered your own question. You know, you're here, you're in this conversation day before elections, and you're interested in this conversation. So, you know, one is to continue to talk about it, right? If you're new to this topic, then that would probably mean that many of your colleagues and your friends and the circles that you are in are also not thinking about these things, talking about these things. So, you know, share what you learn with them first and foremost, and, you know, begin to think about how you consume news and literature, and, you know, even personally through your observation out in the world, how these issues are ever present, because there is a lot of there are a lot of signs, right? Even today, in less than 24 hours, you know, a tropical storm developed into a Category 4 storm, and it's going to hit Nicaragua and Honduras, probably making landfall right now or pretty soon after this call. And that's just phenomenal. You know, very few times has that has that happened. We just had the largest storm, on record this year, pummel the Philippines, just a few days prior to that. And this is a country that's been, really hit hard in the last 5-10 years over again. So the consequences of us not paying attention to these things are catastrophic. And, we've seen a number of storms in the Gulf this year, several that have hit Louisiana, in just 6 weeks, 3 storms, very significant size storms hit Louisiana. Of course, we've had record break fires in California and Colorado. And, the seasons change and the disasters change, but they're constant now. Every month, there's a different type of catastrophic storm hitting the country, and certainly, hitting the globe. So these are real consequences that are forcing us to pay attention to them. And when you think of all of the other issues that one might be uh, concerned about, right? That are part of your own personal ethic and morality, the environment, and the natural laws, and the way that the planet maintains its own sovereignty, right, and balance, um, is playing out, regardless of how you feel about abortion, how you feel about um, you know voting in your car, or you know Dr. Fauci, or all of these things. Like, the real science and the real laws that have governed this planet, since time immemorial, will continue on without us. And so it's our job, I think, to figure out how our decisions line up with those natural laws. And that's the real work, and that's the hard work, right? That's the difficult part. And I noticed that you have noticed a lot of gunk and pollution in the rivers and lakes. This is buildup from decades of neglect and disregard for our actions. And so we have to be more personally responsible. We have to be more responsible as a community, and we have to be more responsible, as a nation. Um, and one encouraging thing is to see the level of participation in this year's elections. But this is just a few weeks of participation. We need that level of participation every day of the year, and for a very long time, because there is a lot of work that has to be done to make up for all of the damage that we've caused, up until now. So keep participating in events like this. Think about the issues in your area, wherever you are. Make note of the indigenous peoples that are from your area, and know that there probably still are indigenous peoples who live in your area that are from there, and support them. Support their sovereignty. Um, I don't know the specific statistic. Maybe you can help me, Casey. But I think of all of the biodiversity that is left on the planet, indigenous peoples, who make up a minority of the global population, are responsible for protecting, I think it's 80% of biodiversity. And biodiversity is just critical. It's paramount for the survivability of all life on this planet, and certainly us. So we're at the top of the food chain. So we rely completely on the biodiversity of the planet. So you know, these are all things that we can get better at understanding. You know, so continue your journey and reach out if you're ever in Houston, and you know, help us and it's in our struggles as they emerge on the national stage or at the state level too.
Um, you know, just directly to the question, what do we do about all this? I think our first thing is to change. You know, we already talked about our transition, our just transition into renewable energies. That water has a different, let's see how to put it, personality and spirit than the water that lives within the gas and the oils. They have their own spirit and their own life, and they belong within and deep within our Mother Earth. And when those, it's kind of like looking at the human body. There is a different function that happens with the blood that flows in your body and within the different cells that create different things in your body. So, you know, when you're born, you started with one cell, and that one cell began to divide. And those cells all possessed a specialty. One was going to be specializing in how to grow a kidney and what a kidney function was going to be. One was going to, and you can look at science and it'll tell you all about how one cell then develops and it makes the brain. Something's going to work to create the hair on your head. It's just the way that it is. The earth is the same way. This is her body. Within her body is all of these specialized things that make everything work. Oil and gas belong inside her, just like, you know, the organs and the blood that you have within your body belong inside you. And when they start to be removed, they start to become something else. And that's what's happened when you're talking about the buildup of the oils in the places where they don't belong, that are the polluters, is because they didn't belong there to begin with. So we start with maybe looking at how things are going to look once that transition gets in place, once we quit sucking it out of the inside of the earth. Things will begin to go back to the place that they belong if they're allowed to. You know, we spoke a bit ago about COVID, and we spoke about how things were changing. In March, when we all had that shutdown for 2 weeks, there was an 18% change in how much carbon was being emitted. So immediately there was a change in how Earth was beginning to heal herself. She has that capacity. Those things that Bryan was speaking about, those hurricanes, those are not part of something that has been part of her natural cycle. But because of what human beings have done, that is becoming more of her cycle. The ice storm that hit us when we were young, my husband and I were talking about how infrequent the ice storms were. Now we can count on at least one or more per year. In maybe 40 or 50 years ago, those were one in a generation. Then they moved 1 in 10 years, 1 in 5 years, and now they're multiple per year because of climate chaos, climate change. And as we rebalance ourselves, living, you know, we keep saying the natural laws, and they're there for you every day. The sun rises, it gets warm, sun comes down, you know, night happens, moon comes up, you know, those are natural things that we expect. Well, those natural things will kick in. And also, humans are very smart and resourceful. So as we learn how to live within the natural laws again, still keeping those creature comforts that we all love, you know, our electric so we could be on these Zoom calls and be warm in the winter and cool in the summer and have a refrigerator. Those are good creature comforts. They don't have to go away. They just have to have a different source. And we have to understand how to be the best stewards we can and start moving our politicians, or those, we have to be the decision makers rather than putting it in somebody else's hands. The reason that things are where they are right now is because we have given power, you and I have given power to irresponsible, greedy, selfish human beings who were not thinking about their generations to come, or even the ones that they're presently living with. They have a false sense of what wealth is. Not that that sacred water is so pure that we could drink it by putting our hand in a stream. That's wealth, that's strength. You have healthy children that can breathe without asthma. That's wealth, that's strength, you know. And so that stuff that you're concerned about is the same stuff that is clogging the arteries of the human being. It is becoming aware that we're taking more than we need. We're disposing more than we should have to begin with. And we're building up these messes that now we have to clean up after ourselves. You know, I know many of you have read those words of Chief Seattle. Said in the 1800s. He was saying, if we continue to poison our own, to dirty our own nest, we might someday suffocate in our own waste. And we have moved there, you know, as a species. Now we have to start cleaning our own nest. It's a very personal thing. And as we do, then we build a cleaner nest and the nests around us in the same way. You're part of a larger community. So you begin with a self-responsibility, you hold your family to a certain responsibility, you hold your community to a certain responsibility, and ultimately those so-called leaders. I prefer to think of you as a leader. Whoever asks that question, you're already a leader. You need to exercise the sacred responsibility now that goes with that leadership and do something about those things you're concerned about. That's grandma talking. Got to do it.
Great. I think the next question is mostly for Bryan, which is, fellow Houstonian here, how can I participate in community outreach projects in the Houston area? What should be my first steps?
I mean, I think that depends on where your interests lie. And I'll say first, I'm going to put my email in the chat. You know, anyone is welcome to reach out, and certainly those that live in the Houston area. But I came about this work mostly because of where I live and circumstances that unfolded, you know, as I was leaving college and starting my my adult life. But what made me continue to do it was, you know, that it was something that I felt was enriching my own life in a way that was fun, challenging, and important. You know, something that was significant. It wasn't just a job, right? That I went to for 8 hours and then did what I wanted to after that, right? In fact, it wasn't a job at all. I did a lot of this work for 15 plus years, largely, you know, as you know, not getting paid. I don't know how else to say it. It was like volunteer work, but not really, you know, because if you grow up with a value system that doesn't look at, responsibility, like personal responsibility, community responsibility, work, then it's not work. Even if you get paid to do it, it's not work. That's a benefit that I have, affords me, more ways of providing. But I think the most important thing first is to find where your interests lie. And what I mean by that is, obviously you care about the planet and the earth, and your community. But how do you want to express that? Is it through the arts? Is it through literature? Is it through music? Is it through policy? Is it through, relationship? Because we all have different talents, and the only way that this all works is if everyone is able to express and fulfill those talents, right? That's why opportunity and equality and access are so important. We shouldn't have a limited number of people that are able to become leaders, political leaders. That should be something that's accessible to us. Say I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an artist, right? Like, actually, it's much harder to become an artist than it is a professional doctor or lawyer, because there's even fewer ways of earning a living, and yet it's one of the easier things too, because you don't need anything, right? You don't need a degree. You don't need any kind of institutional piece of paper or process. You just have to know yourself and be right and express yourself in an honest way. And that's hard. That's hard in this culture because we're not allowed to be ourselves. We have a culture that imposes its will on us into becoming what it wants us to be, right? So when we hear arguments from, the fossil fuel industry, we often hear, the issue of jobs, and as if this is the only way that people can provide for themselves. And if it is the only way that people can provide for themselves, that's a flawed system. That's an oppressive system. And I don't want to be a part of that. So that's your first job, as a person. You have to figure out who you are and where your interests lie. Focus hard and be true to craft, whatever it is, and you'll find ways to do that within the natural laws, right? That are not exploitative, that are not extractive, that bring people together, and then folks will follow you because they see how happy you are, right? And they see that you're able to get things done and make things happen, and your influence grows as you harness your craft. So yeah, feel free to call me, email me, and be happy to talk more and help find. I'm a connector. I like to connect folks with other groups and other people, depending on where their passion is. So I can promise to help you try and find that.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So we're going to get a little bit political since it's the night before the election. So Biden and Trump have very different environmental plans and stances on climate change. How critical is the outcome of this election?
It's there is no choice, and I believe that all of you young people are intelligent and thoughtful, and you have emotions that point you in the right direction. So I don't mind stating the obvious if you'd like me to. Trump is going to kill us. It's that simple. You know, his favorite president was Andrew Jackson. And he built his reputation on being an Indian killer. To be an Indian killer is to practice genocide. And to practice genocide means that you don't have any value system at all, because you too are human, you know, and it's like being a cannibal and thinking that that's a grand plan for the entire planet. You know? And in some ways, actually cannibalizing the planet itself seems to be the structure. These deregulations that Trump is proud of is a very systematic way of tearing down everything that has that, you know, you may call it God or the Great Spirit, the Great Mystery, or science. But it is the tearing down and the fragmenting of the very web of life that is in place right now, that is very fragile and tenuous as humans continue to destruct. On the other hand, Biden is a political animal. You know, his politics are certainly better than Trump's, but our personal responsibility is where 100% of this lies. They only do what we allow them to do and what we instruct them from a grassroots level to be able to do. And this particular political animal has only been in place for the last 2.5 centuries. And so it's very new. It is quite ready to grow up. It hasn't even made it to adolescence yet, even though, you know, Trump still acts like a 3-year-old. I think maybe Biden is moving into his double digits in terms of emotional capacity, of understanding how to be a compassionate human being. You know, he is that. He's an old white man as well, just like Trump is. And so their very ability to look beyond the structure that they have lived in. You know, I thought Bernie was a good old white guy myself. I thought that he has certainly allowed himself to expand a great deal, considering, you know, where he comes from. But if we have to make choices, there really isn't one. If we want to be able to get a few of the EPA standards back in place, if we want to look at that very weak structure called the Paris Climate Accord, it at least is something. If we want to look at perhaps going into universal health care, there's a possibility within the structure of the Democratic Party as it is. But we're making ourselves new. So let's look at ourselves in a different way. You know, within our Ponca Nation, we have enacted a statute called the Rights of Nature, recognizing that humans are nature, not separate from. And that, and it is just recognizing what's obvious. I mean, I got a nose here, I've got some eyes and a mouth, you know, so I can recognize that. I can look in a mirror. And so I also recognize that I am a part of all that is. I eat, I drink, I breathe. Those are intaking and sharing of life forms on Mother Earth, are within the scientific structure of living beings, however you want to look at it. And by recognizing all of that, we can go into our municipalities, we can look in our communities, we can enact laws at a very local level and a personal level that create a platform of growth that will allow this young group of politicians that are you, not the old white guys, but that are you, to restructure your relationship with the planet around you. And by restructuring your relationship and teaching the next generations responsibilities, not rights alone, but responsibilities of how to interact with all living beings, and not wait till you know, maybe your spirit leaves your body and you're going to go to this miraculous thing called heaven, or the other thing that they believe in, you know, then do it here, do it now. Live in a correct manner, live in a place that you feel is honorable, that you can tell your generations to come, this is how I believed that I could make it, where your generations way, way, way down the road can eat, drink, and breathe. It's a very, very practical and simple solution. Start with yourself, work on the policies within your community, within your cities, within your states, within your nation, and globally. There is no separation between any of us, anywhere. And what is good for one should be good for all. If it isn't, it may not be the right direction. Responsibility, respect, those are the most important R's that we need to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we sign off, I just wanted to let you guys say, first of all, thank you so much for being part of this panel today. I really appreciate the time that you guys took out of your schedule to chat with us tonight. To close, do you guys have any final words of wisdom or advice to help get us through this very emotional week that we will endure?
I mean, it's a toss up, and I think, you know, what's most frightening is the stakes, right? I think people are really scared about what another 4 years means, and for some, that fear is immediate, you know, and we can't forget the assaults and the violence that we've already endured for 4 years, right? So we had a mass shooting event in El Paso, Texas, for example, that I think a lot of people have forgotten about, and you know, with the specific targeting of Mexican population, and we've seen children separated from their parents, you know, potentially indefinitely, certainly irreparable emotional, spiritual, psychological violence that lasts generations, right? Like, I'm still, Casey's still, so many of us are still working through generational traumas that we're not even aware of. And so I know that you know, folks who had a target the last 4 years are really scared about another 4 years, because this is a administration and an individual who has a group of enablers who also carry a lot of power, that have allowed, you know, this man to exact hate and violence on people, and the type of individual who doesn't stop, you know, escalates. So there's a growing fear of how that escalation will look, you know, given another 4 years, right? Regardless of how close the elections be. And I know that there's folks, you know, in our professional work who fear what that means far down the road, generations ahead. because we are at a moment where we have to make significant amounts of change, or our opportunity for preventing, a complete collapse and a runaway emissions, greenhouse gas increase is just unable to be stopped, right? So that's frightening, right? And if you value anything about the current state of being alive, like all that's at jeopardy, and it's, I know that is said almost every election, right? But in a lot of ways, it is very real. I think the accumulated per billion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is like 415 just recently. And, that's just phenomenal. We've seen the Arctic region melting. We see the rainforest catching on fire. These are all very, very serious signs that feedback loops are beginning to take over, regardless of our own, emissions that we put. And so there's a lot of fear, but I'll say that regardless of how the election unfolds tomorrow and the coming days and the following weeks, what you can control is your response to that. And the first rule is to not panic, to have a plan, be fair, stand up for people if they're being treated unfairly, and do better. Like, we can all do better, right? We can always all do better, and participate more in the process. We said it earlier. It's like we can't just let the same old folks continue to govern this place. I learned this meaning of economy recently at like the awesome folks at Movement Generations. Like, eco means home, and nomi means management, right? So you always hear folks like, what's the most important issue of the election? The economy. And everyone's measure of that is like the frickin' stock market. The most abstract like thing for most people. But if that number's high, that's a good thing. If it's low, it's a bad thing. But really, the management of home is and the economy is so much bigger than that. And we have mismanaged our home. The problem is that we are able now in our decisions to impact the entire planet and the entire, chemistry of our planet. And without acknowledging that, without being honest about that. And that's coming back, to us right now. So mindful of that. I think that's our charge, regardless of what happens. As Casey said, we're all hoping 45 doesn't get another term, but we're also cognizant that if Biden's elected, like, we still have a lot of work to do, and it's going to require us being actively engaged, and that never changes. That never. That's our lot in this life. So, I'll see you on the other side. Stay safe, and don't panic, don't fret. There's always hope, and there's always need for folks to step up at times. And so we may need you, each of you. Your community will need you at some point, and I hope that you are able to stand up when you're needed. Yeah, and we'll support you. That's all I got. Casey?
You feel it, each one of you, each one of us. We feel what is necessary for us to do. And if your inner guidance brought you to this film, if your inner guidance brought you to this conversation, if your inner guidance has given you curiosity and the desire to do and know more, then you've already set yourself on the correct path. You've already decided that you are that warrior for peace. You are that warrior for the reconstruction and the deconstruction. If it's necessary for you to feel more complete, to take to the streets once you're COVID safe and say, this is what I want for the world, it's a good feeling. I enjoy it. And we will lock arms with you. But you are that leader. You know, in our way, in the Ponca way, as well as other indigenous people, they tell us every time, you could be doing anything right now. Anything. You could be sitting in that hot bath. You could be outside. You could be watching TV. You could be on one of those game things, you know. You could be spaced out with those pods in your ears listening to music, and, you know, you could be anywhere doing anything. But you chose this tonight. And that tells me who you are. So you pay attention. You pay attention to who you are, because you are powerful. You're capable. And you will make the difference just by being who you are. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone who tuned in to watch. I will be uploading a recording of this online. And then in the meantime, I will also send out a link if you are able and willing to donate. This event and the film screening is raising money for Tejas. So I'll send out the PayPal link for that if you would like to donate. And with that, thank you. And if you haven't voted yet, go make your voice heard tomorrow.
Yes, be safe. Good night, y'all. Get some rest.